In this tutorial, I am going to show you a full example of a cloud photo analysis followed up by a painting in which we apply our findings. When you want to study something, in general you're going to focus on a specific aspect at a time. If I'm studying clouds for a game, I would only spend time on the types of clouds I need to design and only on their shape maybe. You don't need to think about colors, light, volume and all that stuff all at once. Here, I'm doing a longer study for the sake of giving you a somewhat complete example. So what are we going to analyze? Cumulus clouds in that case, because those are the ones you are likely going to use and see more often in 2D games. I am breaking down the analysis into a few steps, starting with lighting, finding the sunlight direction, followed up by values, looking at the value relationships between the clouds and the sky, then looking at the color relationship between the clouds and the sky, and finally we will look at the silhouettes and the form of our cumulus clouds in that case. First things first, we are going to pick a reference. I collected all of those clouds before starting my analysis to get a sense of the variety of clouds there are. It's very important to know, what you could go and analyze before you pick 1, 2, 3, 4 reference photos that are relevant to your game. To start the analysis, I will be plotting the sun's position. To do this, I'm going to look at the shadows on the clouds and at their highlights. The shadows are facing away from the sun, at the bottom in that case, and the highlights are facing directly towards the sun. In that case, it's above the clouds and a little bit on the left. I'm drawing the sunlight for reference mostly. It's always useful to be able to refer to it and to keep in mind, in which direction the light is hitting, is traveling through the air. Next, I am moving on to the value study. I use a grayscale filter on top of my picture in order to desaturate it. I am going to mostly check the relationship between the shadow values and the sky's values and the cloud's shadow values with its light values. What's interesting to note is that we have two main shadow tones. We have the core shadow right below the clouds, and we have some lighter shadow tone which is not exactly facing down, it's facing a bit more towards us, the viewer. The two shadow values are pretty close to one another, and the lighter values are pretty close to one another once again. So we really have two value groups in that case. We have the light tones and the shadow tones. We don't have so much of a gradient between the two. You can clearly see the separation on the picture. And note that the shadow tone are very close to the sky value. It's also true for the colors. It's the same hue pretty much, but desaturated. Moving on, we can now study colors. Colors are really interesting with clouds. The highlights and the light part is desaturated. The shadow part, however, is saturated, and what's really interesting is its relationship with the sky color. If you look at the sky, it's a gradient, lighter at the bottom and darker at the top. If you pick a color about mid-range or slightly 2/3 up, you can compare it with the cloud shadow color, and it's actually the same hue, it's about the same lightness, but the saturation is different. That is true for a sky under broad daylight. I said there were two distinct groups as far as values are concerned. It's true, but there is still some transition between the two. If you take your color picker and slide it on a shadow zone towards a highlight zone in the cloud, you can see how the saturation and the lightness are evolving. It's really interesting. It moves as a curve from your base shadow color towards a much lighter highlight color. And that's a property you want to emulate when you are painting your own clouds. It's not moving linearly from the shadow color and you have some, mid-tone right in between the two. No, it's not working that way. You have to take into account the way the colors are evolving along the cloud surface. The last step for this analysis is the silhouette or form of our clouds. I'm starting by outlining some clouds. Randomly, I'm picking them to get a sense of the variety of silhouettes clouds present. The first one I'm going to outline is a bit bended and it looks like an ellipse with a flattened bottom. It's interesting because it has some kind of curve to it. The second one, however, has a similar shape, but is really boring because it is flat. It has no bend, it has no curve to it. It is the basic kind of cloud you would see in a game's background. Let us now move on to a more interesting cloud. On the left, there is one that is really nice. With some sort of tail at the top, it has a rhythm. It has a curve of movement that is defined by its shape. It looks like a skewed triangle, and at the same time it is convex, while the other two clouds were pretty much concave. Another way to see it is it looks like the top is being pushed back by the wind. Because the other clouds are for the most part erratic and forming a big mass behind it, this one pops out. If you are making clouds for a game, you can't obviously make them all like that, or you have to make them all a bit distinct, like Oldboy is doing, with those gigantic cumulus clouds, which are also pretty desaturated to stay in the background, but have lots of details to them. However, all the clouds in the game are like that, and the foreground is even more detailed, even sharper, more saturated as well. If you want to give rhythm and personality to your clouds in a game, you have to make them all like that. They still have to form some kind of uniform pattern for them to stay in the background. We can now move on to the painting study. I have chosen to use that cloud with the interesting shape as a reference. Let us take a second and think about why it is important for us to paint after we've made a study. It is not always necessary, but in that case, it's a good occasion, for one, to train your hand, your muscles, your arm, but this is also a good occasion to commit the information we have looked at to memory. That is to say, to ensure that you remember the key information about cloud color, their relationship to the sky color, etc. And this is not about mental library. This is not about remembering the picture of the clouds. It's about committing some key pieces of information to memory. This is a thoughtful process. You are not just observing shades and colors and mindlessly reproducing them on the canvas. No, you have to analyze the shape, analyze the volume, analyze the colors again, and the relationship between different parts of your clouds. This is all about reinforcing your understanding of clouds. If you've been following the channel, by now you should know that the process is always the same with painting. It's very simple. You start with the big shapes, the blocking, the sketch, whatever. You move on to plotting the light and shadow and refining slowly, adding some details. This works with any art form. This is pretty much the same with animation or music, for instance. With clouds, I recommend that as a first step, you fill your background with a sky gradient. We have observed that the cloud colors are related to the ones of the sky. So it is interesting to plot the sky first and then use it to establish our color palette. Now we got that out of the way, here is the process I'm going to follow. I first make a line sketch to quickly plot the silhouette and get a sense of the rhythm of my cloud. I'm then going to use a cloud silhouette brush I've made in order to give some detail to the silhouette. I'm going to use a combination of that brush and the eraser to make it as close as possible to my line sketch. I often start with white or black just to get a sense of the pure silhouette and abstract any sense of color. I then pick a color from the sky and desaturate it in order to get my cloud shadow color. I then lock the silhouette layers alpha and fill it with that new shade. I left the recording at normal speed so you can see how I'm moving my hand on the canvas. To plot the broad light zone, I pick a round brush and start brushing in based on my line work. At that point, I am not finicky at all with my brush work. I try to be broad and fast. And I will try to keep that mindset for the whole course of the painting, as it is just a study. It is not important to make it look finished or to be too careful with it. You have to focus on your thought process. I'm soon jumping onto using a soft round brush in order to plot some kind of transition area between the light and the shadow tone. Clouds are really soft, so if you are working with a hard brush, you are just going to waste a ton of time trying to create transitions. Use a soft brush. Not only that, use a mixer brush. In Photoshop, you have two tools dedicated to that. You have the finger and you have the mixer brush, which I recommend that you use. If you are using Krita, you have a color smudge engine that works similarly. That is how an oil painter would do it on a canvas. They would smudge the colors into one another to create nice transitions. And that is what I'm doing next. I'm going to smooth out the transitions between the light and the dark sides of the cloud. Clouds are erratic, they look a bit random, and their form evolves over time. Because of that, you can't really plot their form in a very mechanical way. I'm letting my hand flow freely around the canvas, and I'm just trying to make some transitions larger than others. Next, I am moving on to the highlights and thinking more about the masses that make up my cloud. The big challenge here is to define areas on your cloud that are facing directly towards the sun. Because the sunlight is coming from the top and the left, I am going to put the highlights on the top and the left edges of my cloud. You can think about your cloud as if it was made up of big, round, almost spherical forms. So you want to add some protrusions that are facing towards the sun inside of your cloud's silhouette. The lights and shadows are not only sitting outside along the edges of your shape. A quick painting tip, always try to stay a bit zoomed out with your piece. You want to always get a good sense of the big picture. Here, zooming out helped me to improve the softness of my cloud and to refine the color transitions between different areas. When the overall picture is starting to look okay, I am moving on to polishing. There are two essential areas to improve to make our cloud look more believable. One is the silhouette, which we have to add details to. Right now it is a bit uniformly sharp, while clouds tend to fade along their edges in places randomly with the sky behind them. To fix that, I'm adding a new layer behind the cloud and brushing in some soft little circles and color elements that are a bit transparent to create a transition with the sky and to refine the silhouette at the same time. The other key improvement I have to make is giving the form some roundness in space along its edges. The cloud's form is turning away from you along its edges, and if you look at reference pictures closely, you will see that above the highlights there is a tiny little bit of shadow, which we have to add to our painting as well. This is a subtle change that is going to turn our flat shape into a 3D form that is sitting in the sky. Alright, that's it for now. If you liked the video, you can click on that like button, become a subscriber to support the channel, or share it with your friends. I want to thank you all for watching. Be creative, have fun. Until next time.